Rev up your engines! Now this is a Jeep Grand Cherokee. You might think, oh, big Jeep's got a solid frame. No, this is a unibody construction. Now they call them Jeeps, but they're really SUVs. The actual Jeeps, like the Jeep Wrangler, have a solid frame and the body bolts on top of it. Look under this modern Grand Cherokee, there is no actual frame. The whole body of the car is the frame. That's why it's called unibody. One body. Now, decades ago, all trucks and cars had a solid frame, the body bolted onto the frame, but they started making unibody construction a long time ago. Ford Falcons were unibody. You go way back, they started to make them unibody. The main reason is it's a lot cheaper to make them. Take the Ford Falcon as an example. Okay, they weren't worried about gas mileage. Unibody get better gas mileage because they weigh less. It's only common sense, right? But they weren't thinking about that back in those days. They just wanted to be able to make the cars cheaper. But strangely enough, a side advantage is they weigh less, they don't have a heavy frame, they're generally somewhat lower to the ground, so they're more aerodynamic. And strangely enough, they're actually safer for you to be in a crash because they have crumple zone. The whole car's like a giant crumple zone. If you get in a wreck, your entire car going down the road is kinetic energy. That kinetic energy has to be stopped. If you have a unibody construction, the whole vehicle can crush in amongst itself, and that tremendous force crushing all that steel and aluminum gets rid of kinetic energy. So you're safer inside. If you're in a more solid, big steel frame and then the body's bolted on, the frame doesn't crumple as easy. That energy just keeps moving and you're gonna smash into things harder. You're in a worse position when you get in a wreck with a framed vehicle than with a unibody. But conversely, it's worse for your vehicle when you get in a wreck. In the olden days when they had bodies on frames, you get something smashed off, you could fix that part. If part of the frame went, you could fix that part of the frame, right? With unibody construction, more things get crushed. Many times, the old body on frame cars would be fixed in a wreck, but the unibody cars, they get crumpled, they just total the car because it's so crushed in. So much work would be needed to repair it that they just give up and they junk the car. If you saw my video I made a little while back, a guy here ran into a curb with his Tesla, ran into a curb. It totaled the car because it ripped all the aluminum underpinnings apart, even though it knocked the front wheel off and just broke the back rim, and the rest of the car was untouched. It did enough damage to all the aluminum parts of the unibody construction that it had to the drive motor just hitting a curb that car was totaled, and it was only 2.5 years old. But not only does unibody construction a more expensive repair, it also has positive aspects that you generally get better handling. If a vehicle weighs less, it's going to handle better. Big heavy vehicles are harder to muscle around, right? And with unibody, they can be lower. There's not a frame, and then the body has to be bolted on top of it and to handle better. Plus, with the unibody construction, with the whole body basically being the frame all integrated, they can put much snazzier suspension systems on them, so they also ride a lot smoother. Perfect example with this Jeep, even though it's actually an SUV with the name Jeep on it, right? But our wife hates riding on real Jeeps. Wrangler, CJ, she says these things bounce around, I hate them, I can't stand it. We drove around in it, she loved it. I said, see, it drives more like a car. And she admitted, because of the unibody construction, they're able to make a suspension system that they ride a lot smoother. But the downside of not having a solid frame is they can't tow as much. Now, this has a tow hitch on it. Most people don't buy these things to tow heavy load or to do any serious off-roading. You want a heavy frame, the structure's stronger for pulling really heavy weights, and, of course, for going off-road. You want to get a Jeep that has an actual frame. Aside from the advertisements you see on TV with these things going off-road, go off-road with some guy who's got a real Jeep, Wrangler or CJ or something, right? You're not going to see hardly any, if even one, of these Cherokees going serious off-roading and rock crawling. They're not made for that. You can see they're more SUVs. They don't have that much ground clearance. They're great for the highway and stuff, but they're not made for climbing over big rocks. Realize, as hard as they try to get better gas mileage, this Grand Cherokee just has a V6 engine, not a V8. Take it on the highway. Hey, you get 21 miles a gallon. Drive it in town, you probably get 14 miles a gallon. Even with unibody frame, fancy transmission, modern technology, it still gets pretty crappy gas mileage. Imagine what it'd be like if it had a full heavy frame and was even higher up. Now, in the case of most vehicles you're buying these days, hey, you don't have a choice. It's almost all unibody construction. But if you want to do heavy duty work, heavy duty pulling, and you're going to seriously go off-road, you want to get a vehicle that does have a solid frame that can take all that abuse. Get me wrong, this Jeep has 4-wheel drive and all kinds of fancy systems you can put in it. 4-wheel low, set it up for snow, sand, automatic mud or rock, but you do have to face the facts that this is a SUV for driving around on a highway, really. It's not made for doing any kind of serious towing. Well, the federal government keeps trying to get people to buy electric cars and they want better gas mileage ratings. What are Americans buying? They're buying big SUVs and they're buying big trucks. And of course, the companies that sell them, being total hypocrites, say, well, we're going to electrify everything in the future, but we're making a lot of money on these big vehicles, so let us sell these, we'll make a profit, then we'll invest it into electric cars. So we're going to, when everybody says we're going to, that usually means it's probably never going to happen. Like you ask your kids, pick up stuff, we're going to later, right? Well, it's the same thing with vehicles. Americans like big SUVs, giant vehicles, and unfortunately, because of the laws of physics, if you do make big giant SUVs and trucks and electrify them, they will be extremely inefficient because the bigger they are, the bigger battery they need to move them, then it's harder to charge up, it weighs more, then it needs more energy to pull itself down the road. If you ask me, they're headed down the wrong path if they think they're going to sell a whole bunch of big giant electric vehicles that don't go far enough when you pull something. Look at Ford. They just dumped the price of their electric F-150 Lightning pickup truck 10 grand on their base model. Was it because, oh, they like people? No, it's because they're not selling them. And the only way they're going to be able to ditch those things on people is by lowering the price quite a bit. Let's face the facts. If somebody really wants to electrify the world, it's going to have to be a whole paradigm shift. You can't have big giant ones. They're not efficient enough. Now, electric buses, fine. Electric buses are huge. They got all kinds of room to put stuff in, right? And they're carrying a whole bunch of people. So there's efficiency, just like when you fly in a jet airplane. Those things use an awful lot of fuel getting you from point A to point B. But they're not just carrying you. They're carrying, a couple hundred other people. So when you average it all out, it's able to do it financially. So let's say you're going to make a bunch of big, giant electric vehicles. It makes no sense if they're all being driven by one person. And I can't see the average American anytime soon decide, no, I don't want that big vehicle. I want this tiny little thing over here. Almost all the vehicles these days are made with unibody construction. They're trying to squeeze best gas mileage they can. They weigh less. To the manufacturer's delight, they're a lot cheaper to make, too. I mean, that's why the Ford Falcons didn't have a frame. They weren't thinking, oh, we need better gas mileage. Nobody cared about gas mileage in the early 60s, late 50s. They didn't give a rat's behind about gas mileage, right? They're just trying to find a cheaper way to make a car, and they did. And it accidentally led towards better gas mileage and safer cars for the people inside because the whole thing can crumple up much better, absorb the energy of a wreck, so the car's body crushes in on itself instead of you flying into the windshield. They're flying into the steering wheel, and all that energy, instead of being used to crush the vehicle, is used to crush you. I mean, that was total accident. It's kind of like, well, there's a good thing that came out of that. Yeah, we can make them cheaper and people are safer inside. And of course, the downside to you as a consumer, that you get in a relatively minor wreck and it may total the car. That's a big advantage to the manufacturers. Ooh, he got in a wreck, his car's totaled. Now we can sell them another new one. They'd love it if everybody wrecked their cars after they owned them 2 or 3 years, then bought another one. So now you know a little bit more about body on frame, the older style and the style that big trucks still have, and unibody construction. But at least now you can make a wise choice of what you want to buy. Most people are going to get unibody construction because most vehicles are made that way these days. But if you have especially towing a lot, going out in the woods all the time, you probably want a framed vehicle. It's going to get worse gas mileage. It's going to cost more because it costs more money to build them. But in some cases, you really want to have a frame. So the majority of people, like the owner of this car, they want something that's zippy, that's fun to drive, that handles good, that's safe inside, and it gets at least the best gas mileage that it can. Giant heavy vehicle, so in town you're going to get in the teens, but at least now you know what to look for, what you're getting, so you can make a wise decision when you're going to pick out a vehicle. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.